Welcome, everyone. We're just gossiping while you're coming in.
Chit-chatting. I mean, truly behind the scenes. This is us actually
this
enjoying
is us behind the scenes. We're in the green room. So please, we would love it if you would post in the chat where you are dialing in from. And since it's the first day of summer, your favorite ice cream. Rachel loves.
By the way, kind of a trick question because Jodi will mock you if you enter the wrong flavor. So be careful.
We recently had a staff event where we discussed favorite ice creams, and there was this fierce debate that broke out about whether mint chocolate chip was a legitimate ice cream flavor or not. And there is really like team mint chocolate chip and team anti-mint. It was shocking to me, the virulence with which people are opposed to mint chocolate chip.
How could you hate mint chocolate chip? I mean, you might not like it, but you hate it? I will say the thing that like was the most controversial was our one colleague, who's really wonderful in every other way, who insisted that the best ice cream confection is a milkshake that combines mint chip and chocolate peanut butter, which sounds, thank you. We can all be united around the idea that that is disgusting. I mean, no offense if you like it, but ugh. Okay, so let's see, it's 7:04. I think I should probably kick it off, right?
No, you should wait a little bit longer. I think we've got people still coming in. Give it.
Oh, people are still filtering in. All right, well.
I think, wait, man, I'll watch it.
Yeah, I got it.
What's your favorite ice cream? You are an ice cream fanatic.
Fanatic is strong, but my husband does make a lot of ice cream. And we have an ice cream maker, which his father passed away several years ago, and his father loved ice cream. So our ice cream maker is named in honor of his father's favorite ice cream store. His father's favorite ice cream store was The Chief in Goshen, Indiana. So our ice cream maker is named The Little Chief in honor of.
Gloria, yeah. Gloria has posted. Remember, everyone, to post when you're posting the chat, post to everyone. Gloria, you have posted to host and panelists, but I'm going to read it because it's so amazing.
Really great.
Migranti sheep milk ice cream, black coffee chip, and peanut butter with chocolate chips. I don't even understand if that's more than one flavor, brand name, but I just want it.
Yeah, sounds spectacular. But you can't have it because it's special sheep milk ice cream, only available obviously in California. I mean, that's a very California kind of, or at least West Coast.
Although if you see the news, Ample Hills reopening in Brooklyn, very exciting ice cream news. Okay, we should move on from ice cream to talk about the archives. Rachel.
All right. So welcome to our guests. I am Rachel Fishman-Feddersen, CEO and publisher of The Forward. Thank you for joining Archives Unplugged, our second Beyond the Bylines event of the year. I think you're already putting in the chat where you're joining from, but if you haven't, if you could do that, that would be great, because we want to know where you're joining from. Because Beyond the Bylines is our donor-exclusive event series to both thank you, our supporters, and to give you a little look at what goes on behind the scenes in our newsroom and at The Forward overall. We deeply appreciate your ongoing readership and your support. And I want to give a special thank you to the members of our Abkahan Legacy Society who are with us tonight. The Abkahan Legacy Society is for those who pledge to remember The Forward in their estate planning. And that kind of support for The Forward is really integral to our longevity, our long-term sustainability. For The Forward, Jewish journalism, secular Yiddish, and preserving our history. So those are my thank yous. And now a little bit of housekeeping for this conversation, which will be fabulous. Please leave the questions in the Q&A section, not the comments. And there's two places there to leave, bits of text. Please put them in the Q&A. That will ensure that our panelists actually see your questions. Otherwise, they usually just get lost in the comments. So that's one. We will send an email after the event to all the registrants with a link to watch the recording in case there's anything you missed or you want to share it with anyone who you think might be interested, and we encourage you to share widely. And I think that's it for the housekeeping. I just want to say thank you one more time, because truly we would not be here without you. We are a reader-supported nonprofit, and your contributions are what allow us to do this work. So, on to the program. We are fortunate tonight to be joined by Jodi Rudoren, the Forward's editor-in-chief, who is nearing her 4-year anniversary with us, and Chana Pollack, our peerless archivist, who's been with the Forward 2 weeks ago. It was her 24th year. She reached her 24th year. Amazing. Chana is the best, the most interesting, knows just encyclopedic knowledge of great stories about the Forward. It is amazing since she was only 35. She started very early. Anyway, looking forward to a great conversation. I will stop speaking. I will be unspotlit, and you will just see Jodi and Chana in glorious conversation with each other.
Thank you so much, Rachel. And it is such a privilege to be here with you, Chana. People often ask me what my favorite parts of my job are, and right up there is every time I get to talk to you about the archive, because you are a rich treasure chest of information, and your enthusiasm for our history is unparalleled. So thanks for joining us, and thanks for doing this.
Thank you. Thank you. Guten Sommer. Happy summer.
Yeah, we have Yiddish. Maybe Aaron will put in the chat. We just today we have a Yiddish word of the day, I think, on words of summer. If you want to learn how to say heat and humidity in Yiddish, you know how to say them, but I do not. Anyway, so as we talked, as Rachel said, you've been here a guten long time or whatever, and I'm gonna really not try to talk Yiddish. That's gonna really
go for it. Go
for
it.
My job security, but anyway. But I want to start with the newest thing that we've worked on and we've done together, which is a really cool newsletter series that some of you may have seen that we produced for our 125th anniversary, for the end of our 125th years. It was called One Thing from the Archive, and we're gonna bring it back and kind of republish it probably this fall. But Aaron, if you can just show us the first slide of One Thing from the Archive, because people may not remember, but Chana picked out 6 items, 6 artifacts from the archive that mean something special to her, and did a quick newsletter, a quick kind of riff on each of them. And I thought it was so interesting because we think of the archive, we think of the news, the Forward's archive first as like, the first thing I thought of was like, it's like a, an archive of newsprint, of the newspaper and everything we've published. And then I came to understand it was largely a photo archive. But this series was about something different. It was about these different items that you've found over the years and that have their own story. So tell me about why this was special to you and how you picked the items, and about how they tell the story of the Forward in different ways.
Yeah. Oh, thank you so much. Well, I kind of heard it that way. Like when I got the brief from you, I kind of heard it as run around the archive and pull stuff that you really love and then tell me why you love it. Like that's how I heard it. And I immediately thought that as we processed the collection, stuff kept falling out in between. Like I'm pulling a folder. A lot of our collection is folders. Like you talked about, folders of gelatin silver, of the old black and white photos that the Forward published in the paper. But then there are ancillary items. They're metal press plates. There's what's called a stereotype mattress, which is like a cardboard version of a negative of the images. And then there are like these one-offs, and it just gives you such a fuller picture of how the newsroom actually functioned. Some of it is technical. Right. Sorry. Okay. So this just fell out from somewhere at one point when I was going through a series of photographs. It's a silhouette of our founding editor, Abraham Kahan. And it was it's kind of a twofer for me. It's, for one, the art itself really grabbed me. The idea that at this point in time, I mean, he looks to me like this is probably from the 20s or 30s. So he's approaching middle age, and he is such a recognizable figure. Like literally figure is recognizable, that they can draw him in silhouette and it's going to be recognizable by the readership. And I venture a guess, I love to think that throughout the land, or at least throughout the metropolis. And the other thing that really caught me, I mean, there's a lot about it. I could talk forever, but the other thing is that a lot of folks might know Sam Zagat was a really well-known artist in New York, and he was one of our first, if not the first, artists we had in our paper. Before we had photography, we had artists. You know, like today you have that type of representation in the courtroom is kind of a similar thing. That's what newspapers.
Or like in the Wall Street Journal, they do the headshots
Right.
like this, you know. And I, of course, have my own portrait of Ab Khan here over my shoulder in the office, not in silhouette. And we have we've taken this image and put it onto like tote bags and stuff in our Forward store. So, Aaron, maybe you can share the link to the Forward store in the chat in case anyone wants their own Ab Khan tote bag. And let's go to the next slide so we can look at the other treasures from the archive. Yeah, what's this one?
Oh, so this was a piece of metal type, and we don't have a lot of it actually. Like part of the story of the Forward archive is really about.
Slow down for a second. This is like an inch. This is like an inch, right? It's really small, and this is like
it's about 3 inches. Yeah,
and this would basically be making a piece of a headline.
Yes. I'm sorry. The letter itself. Absolutely right. That would be like headline size. Yes. Totally.
Sorry, go on.
Totally.
And we don't have that many of them.
No, we don't have that many pieces of type. Our last complete linotype machine itself, the machinery of the type is actually at the Yiddish Book Center. It was given to them. And so this is like, you know, we have like a couple of pieces of type. And this, of course, was what's called a Kometz Aleph in Yiddish. You know, Yiddish is phonetic. So Aleph has many jobs to do. One of its jobs is to give us the O, the schwa O, the O sound. So forwards, it's the second letter. The Kometz Aleph is the second letter in the word forward. So I was kind of thrilled to find it.
I love that. Let's see what else we got. We can go to the next slide, Aaron.
Right.
Good ones. All right. Tell me about these ones. Oh, by the way, we're going to get back to talking about the typeset and stuff like that in a minute.
Yeah.
So we're going to get more into that. But what are these two delights?
Right. So I think the one on the left is kind of self-explanatory, but you might not know that, right, the Forward's governance boards have shifted over time, but they originated by forming what was called the Forward Association. They grew out of the Jewish Socialist Publishing Association. So traditionally, the forming of the Forward was by their desire to publish socialist material in Yiddish for the Yiddish reading Jewish masses. And they didn't have an old boy network, right? They didn't have what to start with. They literally founded the Forward by passing a hat at one of, an evening, a series of lectures on Yiddish socialism. And they literally passed the hat, and Ab Khan writes about it in his memoirs that, people tossed in coins and pennies and, maybe a nickel or something. And as the evening wore on and they got really, intense about their fundraising, people started throwing in jewelry, watches and rings. So this card to me sort of speaks to that foundational membership concept, that to be a reader of the Forward, you had the opportunity to join the Forward Association. The Forward Association was then like the collective governance of the paper. So,
and I just want to say the Forward, so there are a few things. First of all, to say the Forward Association continues to exist today. It continues to be our governing board. It is the group from which we draw our executive board of directors. And there are several members of the Forward Association on this call right now, Michael Trayson and Gilda Bruckman and James Vest, and I think Hedy Schulman and Jeffrey Mallow. And I'm just running through them. There may be others. Maybe Lisa can post any ones I've missed in the chat to acknowledge them. Thank you for joining us. I'm also just noticing now, I didn't notice this when we first published this, but so I'm just noticing now that it says organized April 1897, which of course is when the paper first published, but I feel like most organizations would say founded April 1897, and I'm intrigued by the use of the word organized because of our labor history. Do you think that's significant?
Yeah, 100%, 100%. And if you notice on the lower right side, next to where it says 96, that's a union bug. They didn't use to, even when I came on in the late 90s, we didn't print anything on any paper that didn't have a union bug. That has a whole history. in and of itself, but
Like the
it was.
Bashem that religious Jews use. What does the
Right.
96 mean? Is that a significant
I
thing?
don't actually. I think that might be the local 90. I'm not
Ah,
sure.
ah, ah, ah. Okay, and who is Maria Spiridonova?
She was well, first of all, again, it's just an artifact that fell out, and that if you look on it, you'll see like two things kind of pop out. And one is that 2 on top. So when I get printing instructions on something, that's a real cue to the archivist that this was actually published in our paper, because not everything in our archive was published, right? So when I see a printing mark, it's called, that's like a great cue to me, because then I can actually find out where and when and what was the context that it was used in our paper, and that tells you a lot about our history. And then of course there's the whiteout on the bottom, right? Like all around her, they've what's called vignetting. So this is before Photoshop. They had whiteout ink. Yeah. So it was, okay, but also that it was this was an artifact that came to the forward through, if you look at the bottom, the Joint Commission for the Defense of Revolutionists imprisoned in Russia. And that was like you have to think about it. Like, first of all, that she was a revolutionist. She was one of the few women revolutionists whose history has made it to Wikipedia, so you can read about her. But before all that happened, she became known to us. She assassinated a czarist official, I think. And so she was imprisoned, and she was like a real go-getter. Like that wasn't enough to stop her. So she has a tremendous history of being a revolutionary. And so much so that her story was part of how the movement at the time presented itself on the other side of the ocean to their supporters, right? So you've got English text, it's telling you the story, it's a postcard format, which I imagine was easy to sneak into America or to sneak across any kind of border, right? And then we did the work of republishing and letting readers know what was going on. So
Amazing. I mean, I know one of your particular fascinations too has been studying the various ways that the Forward did and didn't really highlight women and women's role in various public affairs. There were some ways in which women were, like, I think earlier than in other publications highlighted, and there were women writers, and other ways in which it was a very male and misogynistic place. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, yeah, we could go back to just like look at that forward. It's so interesting, this layup on the page, right? You have the martyr of, or you have Maria Spiridonova on one side, the revolutionist that they're backing, they're pushing. Emma Goldman's memoirs were translated into Yiddish, and we published them. And yet it is very hard to find, aside from like 1 or 2 or maybe 3 women, even on our association, our great equality driven association that was organized, right, not founded. It's hard to find the stories of women. So yeah, and also
there were women writing in the fashion pages and doing the recipes and getting, and we know there were also, in the mid of the century, there were women getting coffee for the editors but not being editors, right?
Right. And also, I should say, though, that we did publish women's fiction. So I have to say that it's a very interesting, when you look at progressive groups, it's always really interesting, because in some ways it's the same being ignored in history and being written out of history, but it's not exactly the same. So we do have early women who were, obviously, if you were in Yiddish theater, that's kind of an easier road to hoe. But if you were a Yiddish writer, it was a lot less difficult. It was a lot harder. And yet we still published very early. Rachel Bruches, I think, is one of the earliest in the early 1900s. Her short fiction was actually published like on Ab Khan's demand, like, oh, this is amazing, you have to publish it. So it's Bruches. Yes, it's actually, her story was translated by my wife, Miro Minyevsky, and it's in our anthology of short fiction from the Forward, edited by Ezra Glinter, called Have I Got a Story for You, which is how I learned about it.
Which is also, I think, available in our store, I think. So before we get back to look at some of your other projects, I want to hear about how did Chana Pollack become an archivist? Why does one want to be an archivist? How does it happen? What's it all about?
Right. Well, I like to say, well, I like old people and I like old things is like the easy answer, but I too grew up with Yiddish speaking in a Yiddish speaking milieu. And I think I was always curious. For example, one grandmother on my mother's side, my Bubby Rosie in Toronto, seemed to be like a different person in Yiddish. And I was like, what is that? Like, what part of her can I not know unless I study Yiddish? So it was a little bit like that. And on the other side, my Bubby Fanny, my father's mother, had come as a very young girl to Quebec City. So her languages were like, Russian, Ukrainian, Yiddish, and then French, Canadian, French, and then English. And one of my favorite, things to do on a Friday night, I grew up modern Orthodox, Friday night, go to my Bubby's house. I mean, I had a huge family and all tucked into this like 1-bedroom apartment. And on her bookshelf was this photo book that I think a lot of us had in our homes, Roman Vishniak's Vanished World. And so I just have, Friday night after Friday night, I think to escape the madding crowd, I would just lie on that bed in that extra guest bedroom and leaf intensively through that book. And it just kind of something clicked. And then I eventually ended up studying, film photography and Yiddish at Hampshire College. And I became really interested in Yiddish sort of from those formative things. I grew up in Montreal for the most part, which is unlike America, like you're one layer away from Eastern Europe. So I heard it on my street, whether it was on one neighbor was Hasidish and the other neighbor was like a Bundist. So it's a very interesting sort of from a linguistic perspective. It's one of those places like Mexico City, like Australia, that had a Yiddish day school system. So you really had Yiddish writers and its own Yiddish newspaper. Anyways, so I think all that kind of influenced me. And then my dad was a consummate photographer. Like we spent, Motzei Shabbos for us was like a slideshow. My dad would kick out the slide, and I loved it. I loved it. And then I became a slide librarian, a projectionist in school. So it just kind of took off like that.
Well, let's get back. Let's talk more about photos. So the photo library / archive of the Forward is one of its most precious elements, right? And a number of years ago, we published a different book called A Living Lens that showcased like 500 of those photographs, right? And I think that's also available somewhere. But
yes,
anyway, you have, when I first arrived at the Forward, you were debuting this incredible exhibit called Pressed at the Eldridge Street Synagogue. It was like the first thing I did at the Forward was go to that opening event. And then just maybe 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, that exhibit was on display again in Pittsburgh. So let's take a look at what that is all about. Erin, if you could show us a slide. So Chana, go ahead and start telling us about the Pressed exhibit and we'll get the slide good enough.
Well, one of the things that's unique about the Forward archive I have learned from other newspaper folks is that we actually preserved our photo engraved metal press plates, right? The process of publishing any of these photos that we're now looking at is a process of rendering a photograph into a halftone print. That's what we're looking at up here. And that's done through the medium of a metal engraved press plate. And it's a fairly complex system and involving, acid and etching and creating a negative and then shining light through a screen and blah, 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 blah. So I've always been, well, first of all, part of the task of saving our archive was to separate out the gelatin silver, the delicate photography from those metal plates, because they tend to be jammed into one folder together. So along the way, we've been actually processing them, meaning identifying them, cleaning them, and rehousing them and entering them into our database. And along the way, like you can see here, we found these really unique items that aren't necessarily, we can't take it for granted that they actually exist in photographic format. They frequently only exist on those metal plates. So for years, I had wanted to, first of all, I was just fascinated by the metal plate as an artifact itself. It's just redolent. It just really speaks. It's very ghost-like, like a photographic negative. And depending on how you hold it up to the light, which I would have to do in order to identify what's in it, you see different things. And frequently they were engraved on the back, handwritten on the back would be whatever editor had identified whatever was in, So I'm reading old people's handwriting. I'm looking at these plates and it just kind of made my mind explode for like the millionth time in this place. And
exhibit, right? You can see the metal plates the photographs and the halftones from the original paper, as well as
Yes.
freshly remade halftones, right? We got someone to
Yes.
run it again.
Yes, we didn't actually have original right. This was a collaborative effort. It's actually really, I think, like lots of fun because we reached out to our neighbors at the seaport, the Bone printers. They were one of the earliest print shops in New York City, and the Seaport Museum has maintained it, and Rob Wilson is like the master printer there. And I brought them over to him. Like I would walk by there on my lunch hour all the time because I just loved all the artifacts in there. And I just reached out to him one day and I said, can you tell me, can you still print this? I brought him a metal plate and he was like, yeah, I think I can. And then he came over to the archive and he took a look, and I just sort of talked to him about it. And then Nancy Johnson, the curator of the museum at Eldridge Street, invited us to curate a show there. And I pitched this idea to her, and the three groups collaborated: the Forward, the Seaport Bone Print Shop, and the museum at Eldridge Street. And we had a day where the whole staff went over and Rob Wilson just printed these. It was like old school Forward, like he was knocking out these halftones. Yeah, it was pretty cool. So
And
yeah,
if you
so
have
yeah.
more to show us from the pressed exhibit, if you do, now's the time. And this is on display in Pittsburgh still. You can still go see it now.
Yes, it's up for a while until they tell us it's not up. And we are looking, if anybody is here watching and is interested in maybe hosting the exhibit, we would definitely be open to talking about that. I just want to, if I can for a second, I just want to explain what we're looking at on the top. Image is the we used to have a neon sign at the top of the Forward. A lot of people don't know that. And it was 30,000 watts. And it said, you know, the Jewish Daily Forward in English. It said Vorwärts in Yiddish. And the sort of the joke is that if you were coming from the West over the Manhattan Bridge, you could see Jewish Daily Forward in English. And if you're coming from the East, from the Williamsburg Bridge, you saw Vorwärts in Yiddish. So that sign was pretty, people still talk about it. Older folks will say, yeah, I remember crossing the bridge and seeing the sign. And down on the bottom, you know, we were just talking about women. So I just want to point out, if you can see in that sort of third row to the right, there was one woman. This is the founding group of typesetters.
Oh yeah, there
Forward.
she is. Who is that?
And that's Adele Keen Zemetkin. Was her husband, I believe, is to the right of her. He actually was a founding member of the Forward Association, Michal Zemetkin. And Adele, in her own right, was a founding writer on our women's page. When that started, she frequently wrote for us. She herself was educated and eventually published a book about, I think in concert with like the Agriculture Department of the United States, sort of on domestic sciences in Yiddish for like,
there's so many cool things about this photograph. So in the second row, you've got these guys in aprons who are presumably the pressmen, right?
Yeah.
So only in the Forward would you have like the members of the editors and the members of the Forward Association sitting, having the pressmen in the photo with them, I think.
Well, this is historic. It's their first. This is it. This is like it's 1897. It's April 22nd.
Oh, this is literally they're like, this is the group of
it.
people who put out the paper.
This
Okay.
is it.
What do you think is going on with these guys who are looking off to the side there? What do you think's happening with them?
Oh yeah. Well, first of all, the history of photography. Like no, you know, it's like what? They're not really sure. But that's a great question. Great question. I think an exposure in old photography was quite long, and you really had to be quite still. And they got distracted.
Who are these kids in the front?
Yes, also great question. Thank you. Okay, so people ask a lot of times, they're like, oh, progressive organization, and yet newsboys are children. and you know, what is this photograph with the two? So I know about one of them. His nickname was Steamer, and you can imagine what his job was from that. And he ended up staying with the Forward from his childhood job, you know, loading the coal fires all the way to retirement. And he ended up moving up through, I think he ended up in the circulation department, but he was one of our first employees. And I say that in quotes because this group of people, the typesetters, was a union shop. The Forward, of course, went to the union shop, and they picked 14 men. Like you supposedly you stood in a row awaiting what we called in Yiddish your next, meaning your turn. If you were a typesetter, you went to the union shop in the morning, you waited, and the, you know, the proprietor, whoever needed you, came and counted off in a row, you know, so you waited for your next. So the first 14 that they hired is this is this
Oh, so
picture.
this is all the types. So those guys in the ties aren't
mostly.
fancy editors? I thought they were fancy editors. Okay.
No, I don't think there's a fancy editor here. I think on the lower right, though, the guy with the fancy papillon, I think that is Marcus Jaffe, who was our first business manager.
And what's going on? What about the babushka on the left there?
Yes, I know, right? So some photo identification is not possible ever, right? Anonymous people on the street, it's hard to identify, but we loved it
Someone with
because
stacks of the forward. Is that what that is?
we believe she was selling the forward. It showed up in our paper. She's selling newspapers. It's got to be one of them is the forward. You know, I can't say that all of them are, but what's interesting is that we do associate, a lot of people associate the newsboys of the forward with a famous picture by Paul Strand, where they're all standing on the right on the front. And we're like, this is the forward's photo of who's selling our paper also.
I feel like we should pair this with like a picture of Jake, our engagement editor, like posting to social media, you know? All right.
Well, you know,
sorry.
I was just going to say there's an element of social media in all of this, even though it's really, really early. Like, think about it. Like, she's out on the street. So she's not just selling you the paper. She's probably giving you the news as she's selling you the paper, right?
Sure.
She knows what's going on.
Yeah, for sure. And we know also, I mean, one of the things we always talk to our association members and others about who people love the forward, we ask them to share our stories, right, on their social media feeds or on email. And that is one of the other things you hear most often about the old forward, right, was the way the paper got passed around, right? Someone had the subscription, and then when they were done with it, they gave it to their neighbor or whatever.
Yeah, there's two great Yiddish phrases about newspaper making. One is like how the paper is made. It's called mebakt the Zeitung. The paper gets baked. That's how it's made. And the other one is meborgt the Zeitung, to borrow, meborgt the Zeitung. So Boris Sandler used to tell me, our former editor, used to tell me all the time that the circulation figures, they always added, like, I'm not going to say how many because it's embarrassing, but they would add a certain number because they knew the paper was passed from person to person. So
I love that. So I'm going to turn to I like to look at the audience questions while we're going. I'm not going to wait till the end. And it's funny because there's a few in there that are like so classic, what you get every day. So Herschel Chait wants to know, did Aharon Aaron Chait ever write for the forward? And Michael Trayson wants to know, or not Michael Trayson, somebody else wanted to know, I can't remember what the other name was. Where is it? I just saw it a minute ago. All right, maybe they took it out. Anyway, there was another question about another person. So first of all, if you know off the top of your head, did Aaron Chait ever write for the forward? But if you don't know, that's okay. But I know you get questions like this every week. Did so-and-so relative of mine ever appear in the forward? So tell us a little bit about the mix of things you do every day, every week, and what the life of the forward archivist is really like.
Well, I definitely answer questions like that and other ones from people. I love to do that. And just one little segue. I'm just going to try to quickly direct that question. Did my so-and-so write for did so-and-so write for the paper? My colleague, Aaron, I gave him this amazing article my colleagues at the New York Public Library put out because so many people have this question and it's legit, a very important question in Yiddish research. Did so-and-so write for the paper, right? And what did they write? So there is a huge research assistance article for that particular question. And I think he's going to put it in the chat. And I urge you to read through it and then come back to me if I can still be of help. So, right. So a typical day is answering those kind of questions and also researchers, writers, artists, academics, all kinds of people, genealogists, of course, having questions and needing assistance, wanting to license our images. Somebody just wrote a children's book about Ab Kahan and they needed to know a lot about Ab Kahan. Somebody else, a German researcher.
Story to write about that book. So, but it's not coming
out.
Oh,
that's so funny. A German researcher just approached me the other day and we're still going back and forth. He was doing a presentation both for German TV and for the Ottendorfer, that used to be my neighborhood library in the East Village, about Little Germany, New York's neighborhood of Little Germany. And he was including Lower East Side, he was including the forward building. And his question was, which I know a lot of people have this question, who are those men on the building? Who are those images? And
don't tell them yet. I want to see who are this building. So we know that there are two that everybody knows. Everybody
Right.
knows, right?
Yeah, Marx and Engels.
Marx and Trotsky are on there, right?
No, Marx and
Marx and
Engels. Marx
Engels,
and Engels.
sorry.
No, Trotsky. Marx and
Sorry,
Engels.
Marx and
Trotsky
Engels.
wrote for us,
But there are
not.
two others that nobody
Mm.
knows, right? So if you think
Mm.
you know who the other two busts, or busts really are on the forward building, please put it in the chat, and maybe you'll get a free Abgahan bag, tote bag, in your stocking. But if you're Sam Norwich, do not answer. You're not allowed to answer. But meanwhile,
And I
Michael
just want to say, I just want to caveat, as we were researching this question, we all know the New York City Department of Building Preservation, Shirley Zabin, this amazing researcher, did the yeoman's work of expressing everything about that building. It's true. But if you read the footnote, she says that she only knew who was on that building through transmission, through people orally history sort of telling her. So some people don't accept that as historical evidence. They want more material evidence. So that's why this is going on.
I see. Okay. Meanwhile, Michael Trayson wants to know about if there's cooperation between archivists of the Joint Distribution Committee and YIVO and the Forward. And this is a delightful answer. So talk about that cooperation a little bit.
Yeah, I would definitely say, first of all, there's associations, there's fellowship, and there's absolutely 100% help. I'll just give like the fact that our show Pressed is in Hillman in Pittsburgh. How did it end up in Pittsburgh? It's true. The Forward had an edition, a Pittsburgh edition. We published there, and there was a tremendous community of readers who still love us there from our having published there. But also the librarian, Eve Weider, the director of the, I think the Millman Library there, who reached out to me for a forward question. We ended up talking, and then, you know, her father, this is really true. Her father had just passed away and he was a forward reader. And so she was really moved by the fact that we had this show that wanted to travel. And she was like, we're just renovating our building. We really need a show there. This would be perfect. We have Jewish history here. We have the forward history here. We have Eric Lidgy over at the Hines, the Jewish archivist of the community. We have Jewish study. Anyways, so that's an example of how we interface, but also on a regular basis, I have to say, I reach out to my colleagues at the New York Public Doroth Division. They're amazing. And all the librarians there for identification assistance. And I reach out to YIVO. Leo Greenbaum, the accessioning archivist there, has been my like mentor and colleague. Gunnar Berg, who just retired at like 86, I think. You know, he's a tremendous resource. He knows all the highest immigration records. I reach out all the time. So
cool.
yes.
So two things that just came out. So first of all, Michael Trayson also asked in the Q&A about whether there's any remnants of the Forward on the interior of the building. And I actually know the answer to that because I last year went into the interior and wrote a column about what's going on about the history of the building, et cetera. And no, the basic answer is no. Inside, there's virtually no trace of what used to be there. But Chana helped me so much in that column, and also a prior anniversary piece that one of my colleagues wrote. That we have kind of a floor by floor understanding of what used to be. And there was this brilliant piece written, I think it on the 50th anniversary of the Forward that they wrote that piece,
I
or
think
something.
I think it might have been the 30th. I'm not sure. I think the 30th.
I feel like it was a little later. Anyway, this guy did this.
So.
It was this beautiful piece that you translated because it was definitely still in Yiddish. And he went floor by floor, and there was so much color in that about the liveliness of the building and what happened in the elevator and the foyer and the cafeteria and the restaurant down the street. It was incredible. There was another question in the chat which I think I might have, or Q&A which I might have erased, but it relates to what you said about we used to publish in Pittsburgh. Somebody said they were from Detroit, and the Forward used to. And they remember their family reading the Forwards in Detroit, and they're wondering, like, how did it get there?
Oh my God, this is like the question of the hour. Ask Rachel. Like I just got asked this by somebody at Pittsburgh too, and I'm trying to suss it out. And just so you understand the lay of the land, at this point of time in this century, almost nobody can answer that question. But what we think happened, to the best of our understanding, is that the corpus, let's say the main body, right, was always created in New York. New York is like, let's say, the flagship, right, where this editorial office really made most of the decisions. But local advertising, there's always a page of what's going on in the local community's progressive labor politics, right? So there's that page. What's going on in Workman's Circle? What are the strikes? What are the union meetings? and local, did I say this right? Local advertising and local events. So if a headline had to come from New York, unless something really local happened and that editor got to make that decision, we believe therefore that the body was created in New York with gaps, and then it was shipped over, possibly by train. And I'm not 100% on this. And the part of the answer would be, what would help me is knowing in each community, did Detroit have a Yiddish press system there? Like, was it possible that they could have, you know? And the same with Pittsburgh. We're trying to figure out, like, we asked that archivist to try to find out, was there actually
I
a Yiddish
remember
press?
you did a story when I first got here. We were doing, you might have to help with the details here, but we were doing these stories about how the forward changed people's lives. They met their husband through the forward or whatever. And there was this story, I think it was from New Orleans. And
Yes.
there was this guy who'd been on like a merchant marine ship that docked in New Orleans, and he went out for a
That's
walk.
right.
And there was a woman who lived in New Orleans or whatever, and would go walk down to the store and get the forfeits for her parents or grandparents. And he ran into her and he spoke Yiddish and da 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 da. And I was like, New Orleans too, it was everywhere, you know, but I don't know. I mean, you're saying some places it just got trucked 2 days later.
Yes, I think, like, for instance, Montreal, Toronto, they definitely, like, first of all, a Jewish bookstore was central for Jewish press, right? That's where you would buy your Jewish papers. If they came in from United States, if they weren't local, I think. And yeah, that story is emblematic, because that is not just like that he went to any store to pick it up, right? He was in, like, down, what I learned from talking to her was that down by the waterfront where the boat docked, and then the streets up from the port was the Jewish neighborhood. Ergo, there was a Jewish newsstand, grocery, shop, cigar store, and that's where he picked up the paper, and that's where she was coming to get the paper, I think, for her family.
Yeah.
And they sort of connected. And I think that was a situation where the paper got passed from one. I don't think both of them bought 2 copies. I think somebody passed it to some.
Do we know? I mean, I've always heard that there were bureaus and editions in virtually every major Jewish community in North America, and also some in Europe. But Julie Stone is asking what other cities had a version of the forward. So I know LA had something, right? What do you know offhand? Which one? How many?
LA,
Chicago.
LA, I think Milwaukee, Chicago, Boston, Philadelphia, Detroit, of course, Newark. Let's not forget New Jersey. Newark, very important. Okay, Newark.
And what about like Paris, London, Moscow? I don't know.
Definitely, we had, that is actually really important, because the other thing, aside from our metal press plates still exists, but the other thing that makes the forward really unique is that we had stringers, meaning we had photojournalists overseas, and we also had writers, and we had bureaus. And somebody who, a historian, and he used to write for us, Professor Gennady Estrak, has written a lot about the Berlin branch. And I'm not sure about France, but I know for sure that Berlin, I'm going to assume Warsaw, but I don't know for sure. And the reason is because, and you can see this actually, Pittsburgh's a good example. In smaller cities, and just to begin with, probably Chicago was like this in the beginning, Philadelphia, I know LA, they didn't establish their own building. Like, the fact of the building is really a New York thing, okay? And other places, they would rent space from their fraternal organization that was like, for a century they were together, which is the Arbeiterring, the worker circle. So they're renting space doesn't mean they have a big sign that says forward. It just means that they're actually renting, distributing the paper, and getting more subscribers, and providing news from, local news is very important. But the forward itself in New York also sent local writers out around. So, for example, Simon Levinson he wrote over 300 items in a span of, I think, maybe a decade, maybe less, where they sent them all around New York, all like Gloversville, like all the tiny towns of New York, where Jews were starting to spread out and settle because of factory work or because of maybe agricultural work. This is like in the 20s. So they also you know, like the way he would find the forward in these hinterlands was, you know, he would try to find, it's just like, what did Jews do today when you travel, right? I mean, this is before Jewish museums, so not that, but they would go to like the butcher, the kosher butcher. They would go to, if there was a synagogue, obviously they would, even though it was secular paper, they would try that. If there was a secular school, they would go there. They would find the
Sure.
Yiddish teacher in town, right? The tailor sometimes, like.
So, Aaron, can we let's go back. Let's look at the Urban Archive, because I'm realizing that we're short on time. So I want to show one more project that you've been entrepreneurially brilliant at. And this is also a good way of showcasing this whole way that archivists collaborate. So this is an image from an app called the Urban Archive. It's an app you download to your phone, and it's basically a map of New York City integrated with, you can roll over the map and see various photographs and stories from a whole bunch of different historic institutions that are rooted in New York City. Chana will tell us some of them, but we have some, how many photos do we have in there?
They ingested 100 from us, and they had to be, one thing about this is it's geolocational. So it's, you know, kind of like a photographic GPS. Your photo, the forward photo from our archive that was loaded into it has to have a New York element to it.
And it's placed in the app where in a way that's related to a very specific location. And actually, don't they have something actually in the physical New York too? There's like a sign or something that when you walk by the thing.
Well, thank you for saying that, because we'd like the forward to partner with Urban Archive. This would be like sort of a paid partnership. So we're thinking about it, in which our images would then be loaded on the kiosks. They're called Linksys kiosks, the kiosks
Right.
that are in town. Right. So you would then see our images depending on where the story took place. You know, the photo would then be on that kiosk.
Yeah, and what I think is so cool about this, and you can go, Aaron, to the next slide. But what I think is so cool about this project is the way we're integrated with these other, whether it's the Museum of the City of New York or the Polish Immigrant Society or whatever else. But there's like dozens or maybe hundreds of other groups who also have
Yes.
photos, and
Yes.
we're this red A, but somebody else is this purple B, and like that's of
Yes.
course how New York worked, right? And works. These
Yes.
years. And so
Yes.
you imagine either walking around the city or scrolling through your phone, and you can experience the treasures that we have in our archive and the treasures that some of your colleagues have in their archives. And I think that's really cool. But tell us about Helen Rubinstein now that we're looking at her.
Thank you. So yes, when I first found this image in our archive, I was like, what is an image of Helena Rubinstein, right? Cosmetics magnate. Why is she in the forward? Like, what does she have to do with a secular Yiddish newspaper? So, I mean, again, it's like, the answer is the breadth of the forward and the reach and what they were trying to do. And and then I sort of did a little bit of research on her, and I understood that she was this tremendous art collector. She was just a huge figure in the community. She never forgot her roots. She's originally from Krakow, Poland. I don't think a lot of people know that. And then she has a tremendous life story, of course, where she, you know, somehow she came from a huge family, very impoverished, and she had an opportunity to go to Western Europe from Krakow to, I think, to Vienna maybe, where she enrolled in like medical school for a couple of years, and then somehow got, you know, pivoted to cosmetics, and she started to get interested in that. That seemed like it would be a fach. She would actually have a trade. So she starts developing it. She comes to New York, and this thing just like explodes. She's just so much so that by the 1920s, the Forward is experimenting with an English edition for the first time, and she gets to have like an advice column in our like,
Wow.
people can write in and ask questions. And one of the first things we published is about women stenographers in an office. They don't want to use that heavy cake. I guess people use like like a base or a foundation. And she had just invented a lighter kind. So they could write into her, and Helena Rubinstein actually had like a column, so to speak, in the forward.
And I think,
and then I just want to say one other thing. Sorry, the other thing that really caught me was that she partnered with Salvador Dali. So like he did a couple of her cosmetic kits and stuff. So she's very aware of art. And this image
I wonder
itself,
if he
she's
painted her.
sitting.
Did he paint her?
I think he painted her. Yes, I think
I
aside
mean,
from
she
designing
kind of
a
looks
couple
like a
of,
Dali painting. Let's
it's
go to
totally
the next slide. I think we've got a couple more Urban Archive photos to talk about.
okay.
Give us 2 minutes on this guy who, this is
Okay.
located right near the Old Times building.
Yes, town hall. So this is David Carey on the right, of course, caught my attention, and it's Pride Month. And this is one of the first images where I thought, oh my goodness, I think this gentleman is gay like me. And like, I never expected to find any representation of myself in the, in that level of, really out kind of LGBTQ representation in the Forward Archive. And that really opened a door for me. And also personally, I came into Yiddish and I got to know his brother. David Carey is from a Yiddish acting family of Leica Post was their mother. A lot of people might remember her. And Henry and David were her sons, and both of them are gay. And Henry is a very out, active Yiddishist. He performed famously Pirates of Penzance not long ago in Yiddish. And he had told me very early on in my journey in Yiddish, he had told me about his brother, who sadly had died of AIDS by the time he was 42. And there really wasn't much known about it. Like that was it. His life was over. His history was going to disappear too, especially having been, I wouldn't say he was out like we are today, but to the best of his ability at the time, he was much beloved by Yiddish actors, so much so that he had a salon at his house, salon, where people came, the Yiddish actors would come and play cards, including, I heard from Henry, that when Ida Kaminska, the mothership of Yiddish theater post-war, when she came from Poland to New York for a little while, she would hang out at David's salon. And this was like just kind of a miracle. So here he is about to perform at Town Hall. That's
Amazing.
The producer.
And what a great segue. So first of all, we've got like 6 minutes left and I have 3 good questions left. So this is a great transition to segue to last year for Pride Month. You wrote this incredible piece, really exploring the ways in which LGBTQ people and history was and wasn't in the Forward. So you just talked about how you found this photo and were surprised because really the broad history is one of closeting, right? In the Forward.
Yes, definitely. And but I want to say that all along my career, people would come up to me and say, I just saw this image in the Forward, like the 1925 of a cross-dressing person, or that's how they would identify it. And today we would say that's a trans individual. And I'm not saying that the Forward was on it, that they were so progressive that it wasn't like that. It was more like, wow, what we call chikave in Yiddish, like, believe it or not kind of thing. And that was always an element, definitely, of Eastern European newspapers, of early American newspapers, right? Ripley's sort of developed out of that. We had that for a while. So I'm just saying, like, they were like, we got space to fill. Here's this funky image. This will draw eyes. We're going to put it in. But looking back today, I started to kind of look for it. And I did find, and it's in the essay, if you read the essay, there was a famous sports athlete who had transitioned female to male, and they were able thus to marry officially, like by government. This is in England. They were able to marry their partner. And that was celebrated on like the front page of the Forward. And again, this is, a well-known individual, a celebrity of their time, but still the Forward didn't shy. It wasn't on the back page, it was on the front page. So
cool. So you just glanced over something that I did not know about, and so Michael Trayson again is asking about it. Please tell. I've always been talking about how the Forward didn't publish in English until 1990, and you just mentioned something about the 1920s. I know there's glimpses, but you said, was there an effort at an English edition?
Yes.
It's
such, I never call it an edition. It's an insert. It's like the same way they did the rotogravure insert, the Sunday Illustrated, edition. They started in the 1920s. I think they were very prescient, and they realized that there was already a generation of American-born English speaking. How were they going to draw them to the readership? What was their connection going to be to the Forward? So they started 2 things. They started the roto, the illustrated section, with bilingual captions. It's not the first time you have like English in the Forward outside of an advertisement. And even the ads, we had our own copy center that created Yiddish copy for the, so I think that's the first time. And then they went ahead and said, you know what, let's try an English edition. And they took Nathaniel Zalowitz, who was, clearly fluent in English. They made him the editor, and they invited people very far-reaching. They had Dr. Du Bois to write about relations between African Americans and Jews in the paper, and they published Bertrand Russell. It was very forward-seeking. They had cartoons in English.
I mean, I think that's so important to think about that. I feel like this also, like, I didn't get clear on this until the last couple of years, but when the paper was in Yiddish and was for a Yiddish speaking audience, it was their whole news source. And it wasn't only about the Jews, it was about everything, because it was about, access to the whole news. And there was some, I'm sure there was a lot of stories with a Jewish lens, but it wasn't exclusively that. And when you start to publish in English for people who are also reading the New York Times and also reading commentary, whatever they're reading, now it becomes more pointedly, this is the Jewish paper, the immigrant paper, even if it's a Yiddish culture paper, but it needs to be, it gets more niche in its own way, which of course is what we are now. Okay, so I have a final question I'm going to ask that's from the audience, but I just want to first thank you, Chana. I called you a national treasure that first night that we were at the Lower East Side Synagogue and the Elizabeth Street Synagogue, and it's what I think every day. You really are amazing. I love chatting with you. And I really just also want to thank the incredible donors on this call. And I just want to say, I mean, I don't usually say it quite this pointedly, but these things that we showed you, Pressed and Urban Archive in particular, they cost money to make. And we right now are, we've got this tiny little grant that Chana's been working with this group called Jewish Gen, I think Jewish Gen, to
IAJGS,
to translate 500 of these kind of personal ads, seeking relatives ads around the Holocaust that where the Forward helped connect Holocaust survivors and other people to relatives in America. We have something like 10,000 of them that we would love to translate and digitize and create a searchable database for in order to help people to search for their relatives. I mean, many of you, that's what you're asking for. And we want to do that. And the barrier, there's some technological barriers, but the main barrier is resources. So if you want to support the archive, I hope you'll continue to support the archive and help spread the word about the archive to your friends who are interested in archives and any of your friends who might want to help support it. But I want to ask, as my final question to you, Chana, a question from Lori Simon Rusinowitz. I don't know how to say it. Anyway, she says, Chana, as we live in such an ageist society, I would love to hear what you like about older people. This is going back to what you said half an hour ago. What do you like about older people? And she says she notes that clearly your bubby was a part of that. So maybe you can talk to us about why you have this this penchant you have for older people started when you weren't even close to being an older person, right?
I think it's okay, I don't want to stereotype, but bearers of history. I mean, you can read history in a book, you can listen to a podcast or whatever, but nothing compares, in my experience, to actually having history transmitted to you by somebody's experience, Well,
I think that's a beautiful place to end. And again, I just want to thank all of you and thank Aaron White and Lisa Lepson for putting this event together, and Rachel Fishman Feddersen, of course, our fearless leader. And really just most of all, thank you, Chana, for the work that you do every day to help preserve our history, because it's really important that it's there for our kids. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.